My mom's boyfriend brought me a copy of the blue box of Dungeons and Dragons, and I was hooked. I had this basement, so I had this room, but it was really 3 rooms that I lived in, and one of them just had a big table with some airplane chairs in the back that I could be the dungeon master from. So I was completely the master of that dungeon, right? And I sort of read this stuff and went, I can do this. So I started firing off articles and dungeons and puzzles to magazines like Dungeon and Dragon and Games Magazine. I started designing puzzles really early, like before I decided to design games. I would sort of try to make versions of the puzzles in the New York Times and Games Magazine. And eventually I sent one in. I think I was 13 years old. And they printed it. It was just a acrostic puzzle that had all the words 6 letters long and such. It was this kind of weird little thing that I enjoyed doing. And they just encouraged me. So I was probably writing these things before I really had a self-feedback loop, a point where you could critically evaluate what you were doing. So I started making games professionally when I was 15. I sent things to magazines and they published them. I actually put myself through college with the proceeds of that, paying for like my room and board and my books and so forth. But it still was only a few $1,000s a year. So I continued to be a investigative journalist during my career right after college. And I enjoyed that quite a bit. But the more I did that was serious writing, the more I wanted to do less serious writing. So eventually I sort of retired from journalism and went to work for Wizards of the Coast full time. And then but all through that I was a professional game designer. Like I never really remember a point where I was an amateur. Most people I know who get into it kind of by accident. I'm the person who believes that resumes, job interviews, design tests, they're all terrible ideas. They're not good for getting the right people into your game creation environments. I mostly just sort of stumble into my friend's house and they say, okay, we got this new game, it's called Azul, you'll like it. And we play a few rounds of it, and I'm like, okay, and I file it into my brain. It's been a long time since I just played games to play games. I mostly just sort of inventory them in my mind because that gives me a vocabulary that I can work with when I'm making games in my real life. When you make games all the time and you play games multiple nights a week for playtesting, it doesn't really leave a lot of time for just general playing. We have a campaign for D&D that we play every 6 months. I've probably played more role-playing games on Twitch than I have played off of Twitch in the last 5 years. There was a point back at Wizards of the Coast where I was having just a really bad day. I can't remember what it was, probably wasn't important. My producer came over to me and she said, Mike, you gotta relax. What do you do when you're not here? And I said, I used to play games. And she backed off, obviously. The thing I do most often is go for a walk with my dog, right? Go out with my wife. Things that normal humans do. I watch sports. I read books. And probably the most significant thing is I consume what's going on in the world. I'm a student of game theory, and so I watch politics and stuff like that, but I just want to know what's going on. So I just add things to my brain as much as I can. If I hired people that were just like me, I would produce only the games that I would make. So we have a very diverse crew. Nobody is right just because of this seat they sit in our company. We try to make sure that you have to defend yourself logically and rationally against pretty much all sorts of attacks. And that takes a special kind of person, and it really helps if you come from a background where you've proven yourself in some other way. So Liz Spain is a fashion designer, right? And she's already built that confidence as a designer. So why wouldn't she be a good game designer? We try really hard to make sure that our play tests aren't one group of people, that our demo staff isn't one group of people. And if you just have that around you all the time, you will get constant feedback, often negative feedback, of what you should not be doing. And as long as that occurs, as long as you're not so attached to your own vision that you're not willing to accept input, you're going to produce something that's good for pretty much everybody. We're strongly focused on representation in our games. There are usually an equal number, if not a greater number, of female characters to male characters in the Ninth World, a sort of post-race universe where no one is white and no one is black, right? It's just sort of the blending of what you might get after a billion years in time. We're big on making sure that some of our characters are trans, some of our characters are of different sexual orientations. The Ninth World doesn't have any pronouns that are male and female. Neither does Thornwatch. Apocrypha has to, because it's set in the modern day and they're real world characters and stuff like that. But even then, some of the pronouns are ambiguous. We just don't want to be the person who says, you have to look like us to play our games. And this is not us. So one of our sort of mantras at Lone Shark is, in our games, nobody looks at their phone. So we want to make sure that our games are interactive on everybody's turn, if they even have turns. So in Thornwatch, for example, everybody's working together, and if you don't pay attention on somebody else's turn, you'll not only not have a good turn yourself, you'll ruin everybody else's. We try to make certain that if there's a game master, they're never looking down, they're never writing in a book or anything like that. We want people to be constantly engaging with each other at the table. And I think we're kind of one of the last bastions of that. If you don't enjoy the people you're playing with, why are you playing the game at all? I've really been focused, and I think a lot of people know me for story games, right? So Betrayal at House on the Hill, Pathfinder, Thornwatch, Apocrypha, they're all deep, rich dives. I really like to explore and theorize. And, I do write games that are simple and one-shot and things like that. And they're great and they're fun, but they're not really driving me the way, sitting down and figuring out, well, what is the life like a billion years in the future, or in a forest that completely covers the earth and churns and moves every moment. If I can get people into my games and just throw them into my world, I think that's the most fun I can have.